All my life, I believed a father's place at his daughter's wedding was unquestionable until the day I learned I wasn't invited. The years of sacrifice, the nights of quiet labor, none of it seemed to matter when she chose appearances over blood. This is the story of how I found out, not from her lips, but from a neighbor's passing words at the gate. I still remember the day the neighborhood gossip reached me before my own daughter did. It was Mrs. Carter, the woman who lives 2 doors down, who stopped me at the gate with a smile that carried more weight than words. "Congratulations," she said, adjusting her grocery bag. "I heard Emily's wedding is in a few weeks. You must be so proud." I froze. The word wedding hit me like a stone. My Emily? My little girl? The one whose hand I once held as she learned to write her name? The air felt heavier, and I forced a smile, so weak, even Mrs. Carter's cheerful tone faltered. "Ah, yes," I mumbled. I hadn't heard the date yet. She gave me a puzzled look, then hurried off, leaving me with nothing but the echo of her words and the hollow ache they left behind. That evening, I sat alone at the small wooden table, where I've eaten every meal since Margaret passed. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every thought until it hurts. My hand traced the grain of the wood, the same table where Emily once sat with crayons scattered across its surface, drawing flowers and stick figures, proudly declaring, "This one is you, Daddy." I stared at the worn patches on the table and wondered when exactly my place in her world had shifted from center to shadow. I waited a few days, telling myself perhaps she would call. Maybe the invitation had been delayed, lost, or sent in another way. But when silence stretched too long, I dialed her number with a trembling finger. The line clicked, and then her voice bright, hurried, distant. "Dad, is everything okay?" she asked. I cleared my throat. "Emily, I heard about the wedding. Mrs. Carter mentioned it. I just wanted to ask, when? When will you be sending the invitations?" A pause. Just a heartbeat of silence, but heavy enough to crush me. Then her voice, softer but laced with unease. "Dad, about that. I wasn't going to tell you this way, but maybe it's better to be honest. I'm not sending you an invitation. It's complicated." Her words felt like they split the room in two. My grip on the phone tightened. "Not sending me an invitation? Emily, I'm your father. Why wouldn't I be there on the most important day of your life?" I could hear her exhale, strained and impatient. "Because, Dad, it's not that simple. You wouldn't understand. It's better this way." I opened my mouth to argue, to beg, to remind her of nights I carried her fevered body in my arms, of birthdays when I gave up meals so she could have cake, but no words came out. Only silence. She filled it quickly. "Please, Dad, just don't make this harder. I'll call you later." And then the line went dead. I sat there in that dim kitchen, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the void she left. My daughter was about to walk into a new life, and I wasn't even allowed a seat in the back row. The loneliness in that moment was sharper than any knife. And yet, even in the silence of that night, I knew this was only the beginning of something far more painful, the beginning of a truth I hadn't yet dared to face. The days after that call stretched like an endless winter. Every morning, I woke with a dull ache in my chest, as though someone had stolen a piece of me during the night and left nothing in its place. I tried to busy my hands with small chores, sweeping the porch, fixing a leaky faucet, trimming the rose bushes Margaret once loved, but no matter what I did, her voice kept echoing in my head. Asterisk. "I'm not sending you an invitation." Asterisk. One evening, I gathered enough courage to try again. I told myself maybe she had spoken in a moment of stress. Maybe her words weren't final. I dialed her number once more. This time, she answered quickly. Almost too quickly, as if she had been waiting. "Dad, why are you calling again?" Her tone wasn't sharp, but it carried a tiredness that cut deeper than anger. "I just need to understand, Emily," I said, my voice breaking despite my best effort. "Why? Why am I not welcome at your wedding? I'm not asking to give a speech or to walk you down the aisle, though God knows that's every father's dream. I only want to sit quietly in the back to see you happy. That's all I've ever wanted." I, the silence that followed was long, stretched so thin I could hear her breathing. Then, she spoke with a calmness that felt rehearsed. Dad, you wouldn't fit in. You'd embarrass me. The words stung like salt in an open wound. My heart pounded in my chest. Embarrass you? I repeated, my throat tightening. Because of who I am? Because I don't wear expensive suits or drive a shiny car? Emily, I raised you with these hands rough as they are. I gave you everything I had. Stop, she interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. It's not about what you gave me. It's about appearances. Mark's family, they're different. They have expectations. They don't understand your way of life. I don't want any scenes, Dad. I don't want whispers. Please, try to see it from my side. Mark. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, sending ripples of realization through me. I had only met him twice. Both times he had looked at me as though I were some curiosity from another world. His handshake was limp, his smile forced, his eyes always darting toward Emily as if asking, "Why is he even here?" Asterisk? My daughter's voice softened then, almost pleading. It's not that I don't love you, Dad, I do. But this is different. It's complicated. I wanted to tell her love is never complicated. That respect for the man who carried you on his shoulders when your legs were too weak should never be too heavy a burden. But the words tangled in my throat, and instead I whispered, All right, Emily, if that's what you want. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the silence as if it could explain her choices. That night, I realized something terrible. My daughter wasn't just excluding me from her wedding, she was excluding me from her life. And yet, as bitter as those words tasted, I knew there was more to this story. There had to be. No daughter drifts so far from her father without someone or something pushing her away. That night I barely slept. The house creaked with the wind, but the real noise came from inside me, memories clattering against one another, questions I couldn't silence. I sat in my armchair until dawn, staring at the window where the first pale light of morning leaked through the curtains. The chair had grown old with me, its cushions flattened, its arms polished by years of tired elbows. Margaret once called it my throne, a joke made with love. Now it felt like a witness to my defeat. The next afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen again, the smell of coffee filling the air. I poured a cup and sat at the table, staring at the steam as though it could answer me. My hand trembled as I lifted the cup, and I realized it wasn't just the sting of Emily's words that unsettled me, it was the silence that followed them. She hadn't called back, hadn't written. It was as if my existence was an inconvenience to be hidden away. I thought back to when she was a little girl. She used to burst through the front door after school, her hair wild, her cheeks flushed, her backpack swinging behind her. Daddy, guess what? She would say, unable to keep a secret for more than a minute. She told me everything back then, her test scores, her crushes, even the fights with her best friend. Somewhere along the way, those stories stopped. Somewhere along the way, my daughter started carrying her secrets to someone else. I asked myself over and over, was it me? Did I fail her in some way? Asterisk, I replayed every argument we ever had. Every time I said no when she asked for something I couldn't afford. Every tear I couldn't wipe fast enough. And though reason told me I had done my best, guilt is a cruel companion. It whispers even when you know it's lying. Late in the evening, I walked outside. The street was quiet, only the faint hum of cars in the distance. I leaned against the fence, watching the neighbor's porch light flicker, and I wondered how many fathers had stood where I stood, feeling discarded by the very children they once carried on their shoulders. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. I closed my eyes and thought of Margaret. If she had been alive, would things be different? She had always been the bridge between Emily and me. She could soften my stubbornness and untangle Emily's pride. Without her, maybe both of us had been drifting, too proud to admit we were lost. I returned inside and sat back at the table. The untouched coffee had gone cold. I stared at the dark liquid, and in its stillness, I saw myself silent, forgotten, left out of the picture of a day that should have belonged to us both. But even in the thick of that sorrow, a small, stubborn voice whispered inside me, "This can't be the end of it. Something else is at play. Someone else's hand is steering her away from me." Asterisk. And that thought, painful as it was, set the stage for what I would come to discover next. I sat in the stillness of my kitchen, trying to chase away the hollow echo of her words, when a memory came rushing back without permission. It was the image of Emily's small hand wrapped around my finger the day we buried Margaret. She was barely out of childhood then, her eyes red, her cheeks wet, trembling as though the ground itself had been pulled from beneath her. She had whispered, "Don't leave me too, Daddy." And I had promised her I never would. It was strange how grief sharpens memory. That night, alone with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator, I walked through the corridors of the past as though they were lit by dim lanterns, each one revealing a sacrifice I had made to keep that promise. Back when Margaret passed, the world did not wait for me to catch my breath. Bills stacked on the counter and food had to be put on the table. I remember walking to Mr. Callahan's shop and asking for any kind of work. "I'll sweep floors, I'll carry boxes, I'll do whatever you need," I told him. He hesitated at first. My hands were raw from the construction site I had just left, but he gave me a chance. I spent my days unloading crates until my back screamed, and my nights fixing neighbors' fences just to keep the lights on. But even on the hardest days, when the ache in my bones made it difficult to rise from bed, Emily's face gave me strength. I can still see her sitting at the old kitchen table with her schoolbook spread out, waiting for me to check her homework. "I did all the math problems, Daddy." She'd beam, her eyes full of pride. I never let her see how tired I was. I'd smile, ruffle her hair, and tell her she was the smartest girl in the world. There was a winter not long after Margaret's passing that nearly broke me. I had 2 jobs then, construction by day, cleaning offices by night. Emily needed a new coat, hers was too small, the sleeves biting at her wrists. I didn't have the money, so I sold my old toolbox, the one I had inherited from my father. That toolbox was my past, my identity, but the look on Emily's face when I wrapped that coat around her shoulders was worth every piece of metal inside it. She hugged me so tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Daddy. Now I'll be warm." It was in those quiet moments of sacrifice that I built my life with her, brick by brick, promise by promise. And now, to hear her say I would embarrass her, those words felt like a cruel rewriting of history, as though all I had done was nothing more than dust to be swept away. I leaned back in my chair, the memory of those nights pressing heavily on my chest. I had given her everything I could, and somehow, somewhere, it had not been enough. And yet, even as my heart broke with each recollection, another question clawed its way into my mind. If she had once clung to me so tightly, what or who had loosened that grip? I couldn't stop thinking about the winters of her childhood, those lean years when every penny had a name before it ever reached my pocket. One memory stood out sharper than the rest, as if it had been waiting in the shadows for this moment to hurt me again. It was her birthday. She must have been around 9. The house was cold that year, and I remember patching the roof with scraps of tar paper while snow threatened to fall through the cracks. Emily had asked me for a dress she had seen in the shop window on Main Street. A simple white one with little blue flowers stitched along the hem. At the time, it might as well have been spun from gold for how out of reach it felt. I didn't have the money. Not even close. I worked late that night at the warehouse, sweeping aisles after the others had gone home. My hands blistered, but it wasn't enough. When the morning came, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the only thing of value I owned besides the roof over our heads. My watch. A sturdy old piece with a leather strap, handed down from my father. It had ticked against my wrist through every season of my life. A quiet reminder that time was always moving, that we had to keep moving with it. I walked into Mr. Goldberg's pawn shop with the watch in my palm. He looked at me with those tired eyes of his, then down at the piece, and finally back at me. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded, too proud to let him see the hesitation in my throat. "It's for my girl's birthday," I whispered. He didn't argue. He just counted the bills and slid them across the counter with a gentleness I didn't expect. That afternoon, I bought the dress. I remember hiding it in the closet until the evening, wrapping it in plain brown paper because I couldn't afford anything more. When Emily opened it, her eyes widened like I had given her the whole world. She twirled in the small living room, her laughter ringing off the walls. "I'm the prettiest girl in the world, Daddy," she shouted, her joy filling every crack in that worn-down house. I sat in the corner, my chest tight with pride and sorrow at once. I had nothing left on my wrist but a pale band of skin where the watch used to be. But in that moment, watching her spin and laugh, I believed it was worth it. And now, years later, she tells me I'd embarrass her, as if the father who gave up even the rhythm of time itself for her happiness was nothing more than a shadow she wished to forget. That memory sat heavy on me, pressing harder than her words ever could. Because if she could forget the sacrifices carved into my very bones, maybe she had forgotten the love that shaped them too. And deep down, I began to fear that this wasn't just about a wedding invitation, it was about losing my daughter to a world that had already decided who I was in her eyes. I held on to that birthday memory for days, like a wound I couldn't stop touching. The image of her spinning in that little white dress, joyful, innocent, certain that her father was her whole world, kept colliding with the reality of her voice on the phone, distant and cold. It was like watching a home you built with your own hands be torn down brick by brick, and knowing you couldn't stop it. Late one evening, I sat in the living room with the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I picked up a photo album Margaret had put together years ago, the one with the frayed red cover. I turned the pages slowly, careful not to tear the corners. And there she was, Emily, at 6 years old, holding a balloon bigger than her head. Emily at 12, smiling wide with braces, her arm hooked around my neck. Emily at her graduation, her eyes wet as she whispered, "We did it, Dad." I lingered on that last picture. I remembered how tightly she hugged me that day, how she said she owed it all to me. That was the Emily I knew, the girl who saw me, not as an embarrassment, but as the one person who would never let her down. And now she was marrying into a family that looked at me like I was less than them. Somewhere in between those moments, my daughter had slipped away. The first time I noticed the change was when she introduced me to Mark. He shook my hand the way a man shakes the hand of a waiter, firm enough to be polite, but already pulling away. His smile never touched his eyes. I tried to push past it, telling myself maybe he was nervous, maybe I was imagining things. But as months passed, I saw it clearer each time we met. The way he interrupted Emily when she spoke, the way his jaw tightened when I told stories about our struggles, the way he glanced at my worn jacket as though it didn't belong in the same room as him. Emily began to mirror him in small ways, at first subtle, almost invisible. She'd sigh when I asked about her work, brush off my questions with distracted answers, spend less time at the house. Once, when I invited her over for dinner, she looked around the kitchen and said quietly, "Dad, maybe we should eat out next time. It would be nicer." That word nicer hung in the air like smoke. I tried not to let it wound me, but I could feel something shifting, something pulling her farther and farther from me. And deep inside, I knew this wedding wasn't just about her love for Mark. It was about stepping into his world and leaving mine behind. And that thought scared me more than anything, because if she chose to live in his world, where exactly did that leave me? I began noticing how Emily's laughter changed around him. Once her joy had been free and unguarded, the kind that spilled out without warning, filling every corner of her room. But with Mark, it was different, lighter on the surface, strained underneath, as though every sound had to pass through his approval before it left her lips. The first dinner we shared together still lingers in my mind. I had cooked a simple stew, the same kind Emily used to beg me for after school. The smell filled the house, rich and warm, and I watched her eyes flicker with a memory before she quickly masked it with a polite smile. Mark picked at his bowl with his spoon, barely tasting a thing, before setting it down with a quiet clink. "Interesting," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "But Emily's used to lighter meals now, healthier." He looked at her, and she nodded, as if on cue. I pretended not to notice, but every bite after that tasted like ashes. From then on, he took small opportunities to chip away at me. He commented on my clothes, once saying, "You must love vintage," with a smirk that turned Emily's cheeks pink. Another time, when I spoke about working double shifts years ago to pay her tuition, he chuckled under his breath, murmuring, "Different generation." I guess. We don't sacrifice like that anymore. We invest smarter. Emily laughed nervously, and I sat there in silence, feeling smaller in my own home. I remember walking her to the door that evening. For a fleeting moment, her hand brushed mine, and I saw the guilt in her eyes. She whispered, "Don't take it personally, Dad. He just, he sees things differently." Then she kissed my cheek and left with him, her footsteps fading down the path as I stood there with the taste of bitterness on my tongue. Over time, visits became fewer, phone calls shorter. Whenever I did manage to speak with her, Mark's voice was always somewhere in the background, distracting, insistent. It was as though my daughter's life had been placed on a leash, and she didn't even notice. Or maybe she did, and chose to accept it. The worst came one afternoon when I ran into them at the grocery store. Emily's face lit up when she saw me, but before she could even hug me, Mark slid an arm around her and said, "We're in a hurry, Mr. Turner. Big plans, you know." He called me Mr. Turner, not Dad, not even Robert. And Emily lowered her eyes, letting him lead her past me without protest. That was when I realized the truth I hadn't wanted to face. Mark wasn't just a part of her life. He was rewriting it, line by line, erasing me in the process. And perhaps that explained why my daughter's wedding, the day I once dreamed of sharing with her, no longer had a place for me at all. I could have lived with being overlooked. A seat in the back row, a brief wave in passing, that would have been enough, so long as I could watch her begin this new chapter. But what I couldn't ignore was the way Mark's shadow fell over every choice she made, as though her life had become a stage he directed from the wings. I remember the first time I overheard it clearly. I had stopped by her apartment with a basket of pears from the market. I knocked, and before she opened the door, voices carried through the thin walls. "He doesn't belong there, Emily," Mark was saying, his tone sharp, rehearsed. "Do you really want our pictures ruined by his old jacket, his scuffed shoes? What will my family think?" There was a pause, then Emily's voice, quiet but trembling. "He's my father, Mark. He's all I have left." "All you have left?" Mark scoffed. "Then all the more reason to move forward. This wedding is about us. About the future, not about dragging the past into every photograph." The door opened suddenly, and there she was, smiling too brightly, her eyes darting nervously toward me as though wondering how much I had heard. "Dad, what a surprise," she said, ushering me inside. Mark offered a handshake, his lips curved but his eyes flat, like a man forced to play polite for appearances. We sat for tea, though no one really drank it. Emily kept smoothing the fabric of her skirt, her hands restless. Mark leaned back in his chair, casual in posture but heavy with judgment, his gaze lingering on the frayed cuff of my sleeve. "You know, Mr. Turner," he said, emphasizing my name as though to remind me of my place, "our wedding will be very formal. The guest list is selective. We want to keep it elegant, you understand." I sipped the bitter tea and looked at my daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I understand," I replied quietly, though what I understood most was that this wasn't about guest lists or elegance. This was about erasure. After I left, I stood in the hallway holding the basket, suddenly too heavy in my arms. I thought about Margaret, about how she would have marched into that room and silenced him with one sharp word. She would have reminded Emily of every sacrifice carved into these calloused hands. But Margaret was gone, and my voice no longer carried weight in my daughter's world. As I walked down the street, the pears shifting against each other in their basket, I realized something bitter. It wasn't just Mark who wanted me gone. He had planted seeds in Emily's heart, and she was starting to believe them. And if I didn't find the courage to face this, I knew those seeds would take root and grow until there was no room for me in her life at all. The night after that visit, I sat in my dimly lit kitchen with the pears still sitting untouched on the counter. Their skins had begun to wrinkle, their sweetness turning sour, and I couldn't bring myself to eat them. They were meant for Emily, after all. Looking at them felt like looking at my own place in her life, once wanted, now left to spoil. I kept hearing Mark's voice in my head, smooth as glass but sharp underneath. "He doesn't belong there." Asterisk. Over and over, those words gnawed at me. And then, like a cruel echo, Emily's silence. That silence was worse than anything he said, because it told me she was starting to agree. I tried to write her a letter that night, something that might remind her of who I was, of the years when I was her whole world. I wrote about the nights I sat up with her when fevers made her small body shake. I wrote about the lunches I skipped so she could have field trip money. I wrote about Margaret, how her mother's last words to me were, "Take care of our girl, asterisk." But every time I reached the end of a page, I tore it out, crumpled it, and tossed it into the bin. My words sounded desperate, like begging, and I didn't want to beg my own daughter for love. Still, the weight pressed down on me. The next morning, I walked to the park, hoping fresh air would quiet my mind. Children laughed on the swings, their voices carrying across the field, and for a moment I was back in time, pushing Emily higher and higher until she squealed, "Don't let go, Daddy." I never did, not once. But now it felt like she had let go of me. I sat on a bench, staring at the branches above, and thought of all the names she had once called me: Daddy, Papa, Hero. How quickly they had been replaced by silence, by avoidance, by the heavy pause before she admitted I would not be welcome on her wedding day. The humiliation cut deeper than any stranger's insult ever could. Strangers don't know the calluses on your hands, or the way your heart breaks when you sell your father's watch just to buy your daughter a dress. But Emily knew. She knew every sacrifice, every scar, and still she let him convince her I was something to be hidden away. I walked home that evening with slow steps, each one heavier than the last. And as I unlocked the door and stepped back into the quiet, I realized the truth I had been trying not to face. It wasn't just that I was uninvited. It was that I had become a shame to her, a burden in the eyes of the one person I once thought could never see me that way. But even in that pain, another thought refused to let me rest. If I was truly an embarrassment to her, then why did her eyes always look away when mine tried to meet hers? What was she hiding behind that silence? That question haunted me for days, the look in her eyes when Mark spoke, the way her gaze slipped from mine as though she couldn't bear the weight of what she was choosing. Shame has a way of showing itself, even when words are absent, and I knew Emily carried something she hadn't said aloud. One evening, when the house felt lonelier than usual, I pulled out an old wooden box from the closet. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in years, envelopes yellowed with time, folders tied with frayed string, the quiet record of sacrifices no one else ever saw. Among them was a thick manila envelope with her name written in my own uneven handwriting, for Emily, asterisk. I had prepared it years ago, after Margaret passed. Back then, I worked odd jobs, saved what I could, invested in a small piece of land just outside of town. It wasn't much to anyone else. But to me, it was a promise that one day, when Emily was ready to start her own life, she would have something solid beneath her feet. Every cent, every acre, I had put aside for her. I had imagined the day I would hand it to her. Perhaps at her wedding, perhaps with Margaret's photo nearby, a quiet blessing from the woman who should have been there too. I ran my fingers over the envelope, feeling the weight of all those years, all those late nights and sore hands. The thought that Emily believed I had nothing, that I was just an old man with a worn jacket and empty pockets, cut deeper than I wanted to admit. She didn't know. She couldn't know. And yet, part of me felt a bitter resolve take root. I had intended this as a gift, a gesture of love to carry her into her marriage. But how could I give it now? To a daughter who told me my presence would embarrass her? To a man who saw me as nothing more than a stain on their photographs? I slid the envelope back into the box and closed it carefully, the snap of the lid echoing in the quiet room. I told myself it would stay there until the day Emily remembered who I was, not the man Mark painted me to be, but the father who kept every promise he ever made to her. I leaned back in my chair, the box at my feet, and for the first time in years I felt both the weight of what I carried and the sharp edge of my own boundaries. I could not force my way into her wedding. I could not make her see me. But I could choose when and if she would ever learn what I had saved for her. And deep in that quiet night, one thought grew louder than the rest. Perhaps one day she would discover that the father she pushed aside had held the very key to her future in his hands all along. The days crawled forward, each one carrying me closer to the wedding I wasn't meant to see. The town seemed to know before I did. Neighbors whispered congratulations to Emily when they spotted her at the florist or walking arm in arm with Mark at the market. Everywhere I turned, reminders of that celebration pressed against me like thorns. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. No invitation lay on my table. No phone call came to bridge the silence. The sun rose just the same, though it felt colder, harsher. I brewed coffee and set out a single cup, the steam curling upward in slow, delicate ribbons. My chair across the table sat empty, the same way it had since Margaret left me. For the first time in my life, I wondered if Emily meant to leave me too, not with death, but with choice. I tried to distract myself, polishing the old frame that held Margaret's smile, tightening loose screws on the porch railing, even rearranging the books that hadn't been opened in years. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't drown out the bells. They carried from the church across town, faint but steady, each toll a reminder of where my daughter was, of the vows she was making without me. I imagined her standing there in white, her hands folded around Mark's, her eyes lowered while her lips formed promises. And I imagined the room filled with laughter, applause, and photographs I would never see. I sat by the window, the light fading across the yard, and felt time stretch itself thin. I had pictured this day so differently for so many years, walking her down the aisle, whispering to her that she looked just like her mother, holding her hand one last time before giving it to someone who promised to cherish her. That dream had died quietly, replaced by the hollow ache of absence. By evening, the bells had long since stopped, replaced by silence. I heated a bowl of soup, though it tasted of nothing, and sat staring at the wall as shadows lengthened across the room. Somewhere across town, music played, glasses clinked, laughter filled the air. And here, only the tick of the clock kept me company. I thought I would cry, but no tears came. Instead, there was only a stillness, heavy and endless, like the pause between breaths. And in that stillness, I wondered if Emily even thought of me in that moment, if a part of her heart hesitated, remembering the man who had once been her whole world. I didn't know it then, but the silence of that evening would not last. Before the night was over, the phone would ring. And with it, the first crack in the perfect life she thought she had built. I must have dozed off in that chair, the soup still cooling on the table beside me. The room was wrapped in shadows when the sudden ring of the telephone jolted me awake. It startled me, not only because the sound was so sharp in the silence, but because no one ever called me at that hour anymore. For a moment I just stared at it, the shrill tone filling the kitchen like an alarm, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally lifted the receiver, I heard nothing but sobs, familiar sobs. "Dad?" Emily's voice came through, cracked and trembling. "Dad, are you there?" I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight, as if I'd forgotten how to speak. "I'm here," I whispered. "What's happened, Emily?" She couldn't get the words out at first. All I could hear was her crying, the sound of her breath hitching in broken pieces. My hand gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "Talk to me," I urged softly. "Please, tell me what's wrong." There was a pause. Then finally, through the tears, she spoke. "He left me, Dad. Mark." He walked out. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending shock through every part of me. I sat back slowly, the chair creaking beneath me. "Left you? Tonight? On your wedding night?" "Yes," she sobbed. "At the reception. He said he needed some air. He never came back. They found a note in his car. He said he couldn't do it. That I wasn't what he wanted after all." Her voice broke entirely then, crumbling under the weight of her confession. I pressed my hand against my forehead, closing my eyes. Part of me burned with anger at that man for shattering her, anger at myself for not warning her louder, for not being there to shield her. But another part of me ached with a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. This was supposed to be her day of joy, yet here she was, broken, calling the very father she had pushed aside. "Come home, Emily," I said quietly. The words escaped before I even thought about them. "If you need me, come home." There was silence on the line, just the faint sound of her breathing, unsteady and fragile. Do you still want me there? After everything?" she whispered. I closed my eyes tighter, feeling the sting behind them. "I never stopped wanting you, Emily, not for a single moment." The line went quiet again, as though she was trying to gather herself, and then she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Dad." Her apology lingered in the air, but I didn't answer right away, because even as my heart broke for her, I knew this was only the beginning of a truth. She hadn't yet confessed the truth of why she had chosen to keep me away in the first place. I didn't sleep after that call. I sat in the chair with the phone still in my hand, long after the line went silent, my mind running in circles I couldn't stop. Emily's voice, broken, desperate, kept replaying in my ears. For years, I had imagined being part of her wedding day, imagined tears of joy, not the sobs of betrayal. And yet, here we were, father and daughter, connected again, only by sorrow. The next morning, she came to my house. I heard the hesitant knock on the door, softer than I remembered her knocking as a child. When I opened it, Emily stood there, makeup smudged, her wedding dress replaced by a plain sweater and jeans, but her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 broken vows. For a moment, she didn't say a word. She just looked at me, waiting, maybe dreading whether I'd close the door or let her in. I stepped aside. "Come in, Emily." She walked slowly into the kitchen, the room still carrying the faint smell of last night's untouched soup. She sat at the table where she had once spread out her homework, now resting her head in her hands like a child lost. I poured her a cup of coffee, set it down in front of her, and waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, brittle. "Dad, it wasn't just that he left me. It was why he left me." I stayed quiet, letting her find the courage to continue. She lifted her eyes, glistening with unshed tears. "Mark only wanted me because he thought I had money. He believed you had already transferred things to my name, that there was some inheritance, some hidden account. He told me once that marrying me meant stepping into security. I thought he was joking." Her lip trembled. "But last night, when he realized there was nothing, he said he couldn't waste his life on someone who came from nothing." I felt the words pierce me like cold steel. So that was it. The man who had worked so hard to erase me from her life had only been interested in what he thought I had left behind. I clenched my jaw, trying to hide the storm rising inside me. Emily's shoulders shook as she whispered, "I was so blind, Dad. I thought he loved me for me. But the truth is, I pushed you aside because he convinced me I had to. And now I've lost everything." I leaned forward, my voice steady though my heart quaked. "No, Emily, you haven't lost everything. You still have me." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks as she covered her face with her hands. I watched her break in front of me, the same daughter I once promised would never walk alone. But even as I reached across the table to hold her trembling fingers, one thought burned quietly in my chest. She didn't yet know the full truth, that the inheritance she thought didn't exist was real, and it had always been waiting in silence. Emily sat across from me, her face pale, her fingers clutching the coffee cup like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. Her tears left small circles on the table, dark spots against the old wood I had polished so many times over the years. She seemed smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child waking from nightmares. Her voice cracked as she spoke again. "He said I was a fool, Dad. He told me I had nothing, no future, no stability, nothing to offer him. He looked at me like I was worthless." She covered her mouth, choking on the memory. And I believed him. I believed every word. The rage that flared inside me was silent but fierce, like a storm gathering far out at sea. I wanted to curse Mark's name, to demand why my daughter had given her heart to someone who only saw her as a ledger. But more than anything, I wanted to pull her into my arms and remind her of the truth that she had never been worthless, not for a single day of her life. "You listen to me," I said softly, my hand trembling as I reached across the table. She let me take hers, her knuckles white and cold. "You are not nothing, Emily. You never have been. If that man couldn't see the worth in you, it's because he was blind, not because you were empty." She tried to hold my gaze, but shame pulled her eyes away. "But I let him change me. I let him make me think you weren't enough, that I had to push you aside to belong in his world. And now I've lost him in you. I don't deserve your kindness, Dad." Her words cut me deeper than she knew. I thought of all the nights I had gone hungry so she wouldn't. The winters when I had traded warmth for her comfort. The years of carrying her laughter as the only payment I needed. And now she sat here believing she had lost me, when I had never once let go. I took a long breath, steadying my voice. Emily, I may not have been at your wedding, but I've been at every step of your life. Even now, when you think you've lost everything, you still have me. And as long as I'm breathing, you'll never be alone. Her tears fell harder then, not the sharp sobs of despair, but the softer kind, like a dam finally breaking. She leaned forward, her forehead against my hand, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Dad. I don't know how to make this right." I looked down at her, my heart breaking and healing in the same moment. There was something she didn't know, something I had kept hidden for years, waiting for the right time. And though this moment was drenched in sorrow, I realized it was the time she needed it most. Because in the drawer behind me lay the envelope with her name on it, the inheritance she thought never existed, the gift I had meant to place in her hands the day she married. I sat in silence for a long while, watching her shoulders tremble as she wept into her hands. My daughter, the same little girl who once believed her father could fix anything with a smile, was now sitting across from me, broken by the very man she had chosen over me. There was an ache in my chest that words could not soften, but beneath that ache lay something stronger, a decision I had been carrying alone for years. Slowly, I rose from my chair and walked to the old dresser against the wall. My hand lingered on the top drawer, the one I rarely opened. Emily lifted her head, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion. "Dad, what are you doing?" I pulled out the envelope, worn at the edges, her name written across the front in my faded handwriting. I held it for a moment, the weight of it heavy in my palm, before setting it down on the table between us. "This was always meant for you," I said softly. She looked at it as though it might vanish if she blinked. "What? What is this?" I pushed it closer. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she slid her fingers beneath the flap. Inside, she found the deeds to the small piece of land I had bought so many years ago, the savings account details, the notes I had written explaining each sacrifice that made it possible. She read in silence, her breath catching with every page, until she finally looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet. "Dad, all this time?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "All this time," I nodded. "I saved it for your wedding day. I wanted to give you something solid, something that would remind you that no matter what life took from you, you would never start empty-handed. But when you told me I wasn't welcome, when you said I'd embarrass you, I couldn't bring myself to place it in your hands." Her lips parted, but no words came, only tears. She pressed the envelope against her chest, like it was both a gift and a punishment, the weight of regret heavy in her eyes. "I thought you had nothing," she finally whispered. "That's what he made me believe, and yet you were carrying this for me all along." I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. "Emily, it was never about the money or the land. It was about love, about making sure you'd always be safe. That's what fathers do. We give even when it costs us everything." Her sobs returned, softer now, but filled with the ache of realization. "I don't deserve this," she murmured. "I don't deserve you." I shook my head. "No, Emily. You don't need to earn my love. You only need to remember it." She lowered her head into her hands again, and for the first time in years, I felt her truly break, not from betrayal, but from the weight of her own choices. And in that breaking, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Would she find the strength to rebuild what she had nearly thrown away, or would this gift remain nothing more than a reminder of what could have been? Emily sat frozen, the envelope pressed against her chest, as if it were the last piece of me she could hold on to. The kitchen was silent, but for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second pulling us deeper into the space between who we had been and who we were now. Her voice came small, almost childlike. "How do you still love me after what I did? After I told you not to come? After I said you'd embarrass me? How can you sit here and give me this?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the lines in my hands, hands that had carried her through fevers, through storms, through every moment Margaret should have been there to ease. My chest felt heavy, but my answer came without hesitation. "Because I'm your father, Emily. And a father doesn't stop being a father, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." Her tears spilled over, rolling down her cheeks unchecked. "I don't deserve you." she whispered again. You're right, I said quietly, the words cutting even me as they left my lips. She looked up sharply, wounded, until I continued. You don't deserve me because you can't earn what's already yours. Love isn't a debt, Emily. It's not something to deserve or pay back. It just is. She broke then, her sobs filling the room, her body shaking as years of pride and distance seemed to collapse all at once. I moved from my chair and knelt beside her, the wood floor pressing against my knees. For the first time in far too long, I gathered her into my arms. She clung to me desperately, her fingers gripping the back of my shirt the way they once did when thunderstorms scared her awake. I'm so sorry, Dad, she cried into my shoulder. I let him change me. I let him turn me against you. I thought if I just followed his lead, I'd be enough for him. But all along, I was losing the only person who ever truly loved me. I rested my chin on her hair, the scent of her shampoo carrying me back to nights I braided her hair before school. You lost your way, Emily, I murmured. But you found your way back. That's what matters. We stayed like that for a long while, father and daughter holding on as though the world outside no longer existed. And yet, beneath the warmth of her embrace, a quiet thought lingered in the back of my mind. Love could forgive, but trust was another matter. Trust, once broken, does not return so easily. When at last she pulled away, her eyes red but steady, she whispered, Can you ever forgive me? I looked at her, my heart torn between sorrow and hope. Forgiveness, yes. But Emily, forgiveness is only the beginning. What comes after will be the harder road. And though she nodded, though she promised she would prove herself, I knew deep down this story was not yet finished. For even in reconciliation, the shadow of betrayal never fully disappears. It waits, lingering, daring us to face it again. The night stretched on, quiet except for the wind brushing against the windows. Emily sat across from me, her fingers running over the edges of the envelope again and again, as though she was afraid it might dissolve if she let it go. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a softness there now, a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. Dad, she said suddenly, her voice raw, I don't know how to fix what I've done. I don't know how to undo the things I said to you. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. You can't undo words, Emily. They stay. They leave scars. But you can live differently. You can let your actions speak louder than your regrets. She nodded slowly, her throat working as she swallowed. I thought Mark was giving me a better life. I thought, if I just did what he wanted, maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere bigger, somewhere better. But I lost myself, and I almost lost you. I studied her face, the girl I raised, and the woman she had become colliding in one fragile expression. Belonging doesn't come from places, Emily. It comes from people. And you will always belong here with me, no matter what this world tells you. Her tears slipped down again, but this time they were quieter, less frantic. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it found mine. All these years, I thought you had nothing to give me, but you gave me everything. The nights you stayed up when I was sick, the winters you worked until your hands bled, the patience you had when I was too stubborn to listen. And even now, she pressed the envelope to her chest. You were carrying this for me all along. My throat tightened, but I held her gaze. This, I said, tapping the envelope gently, was only paper and ink. What mattered was never the deed or the account. What mattered was you. And the truth is, Emily, this gift wasn't just meant to help you start a marriage. It was meant to remind you that love, real love, asks nothing in return. She broke down again, though more quietly, laying her head against our joined hands. For the first time in years, I felt her lean on me, not out of obligation, but out of need, the same way she once did when nightmares woke her in the middle of the night. We sat there until the clock struck midnight, neither of us moving, both afraid that if we let go, the fragile thread holding us together might snap. Finally, she whispered, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I haven't lost you. Her words carried weight, but they also carried uncertainty. Because promises made in the ashes of regret are easy. It's the keeping of them that tests the soul. And as I looked at her, I realized the hardest part was yet to come the morning after, when sorrow faded and choices had to be made. That was when we would learn whether this moment of reconciliation would bloom into something lasting or wither like so many forgotten vows. Morning crept in quietly, soft light spilling through the curtains and brushing against Emily's face as she sat slumped at the kitchen table. She must have dozed off with her head resting on her arms, the envelope still clutched tightly in her hands. I watched her for a while, the rise and fall of her breath, the way her hair fell across her cheek, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to curl up on the couch beside me after school and fall asleep before dinner. When she stirred awake, blinking against the pale light, she looked at me as though uncertain whether I'd still be there. Her voice was hoarse when she whispered, "Did I dream it, Dad? Did you really give me this?" She held up the envelope, her fingers trembling. "You didn't dream it," I said gently. "It's yours. It was always yours." Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, she broke into tears again, softer now, her face buried in her hands. "I don't deserve it," she sobbed. "I don't deserve you." I rose from my chair and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you don't earn a father's love. You live it, you carry it with you. And even when you try to throw it away, it waits quietly for you to return." Her shoulders shook under my hand, and for a moment she didn't respond. Then, slowly, she lifted her face, streaked with tears but steadier now. "I wasted so much time, Dad. Time I could have spent with you. Time I gave to someone who didn't care if I lived or disappeared. And now I've hurt you more than I can ever fix." Her confession pierced me, but it also opened something inside me, a place where anger finally gave way to sorrow, and sorrow gave way to hope. I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "You can't change the time that's gone, Emily, but you can choose what to do with the time that's left." She reached for my hand then, holding it tightly as though she feared it might vanish. "I will, Dad. I swear to you. I'll make it right." I searched her face, looking for the truth behind her words, and I saw both desperation and sincerity. But I also knew how fragile such promises could be. People often speak them in the ruins of their mistakes, only to let them fade when life becomes easy again. I squeezed her hand, meeting her eyes. "Don't promise me with words, Emily. Promise me with the way you live. That's the only way I'll believe." She nodded, her breath unsteady, her eyes shimmering with determination. "Then I will. You'll see." Her vow hung in the air between us, fragile as glass, strong as steel depending on what she chose to do with it. And though a part of me longed to believe, another part held back, waiting to see if her remorse would grow into something real, or if it would crumble with time. Because forgiveness may come in a moment, but redemption is a road. And Emily had only just taken her first step. The house felt different in the days that followed. For years it had carried only the sound of my footsteps, the creak of the old floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. But now, Emily's presence filled the rooms like a ghost trying to relearn its place. She lingered in the kitchen, washed dishes without being asked, even swept the porch where Margaret used to sit with her tea. She didn't say much, but her silence wasn't cold anymore. It was searching, like a child trying to stitch herself back into a fabric she had torn. One evening, as the sun melted low behind the trees, she sat across from me at the table, her hands folded tightly, her eyes restless. "Dad," she began, her voice low, "I keep replaying everything I said to you. The way I told you not to come, the way I let him convince me you were less. I feel sick when I think about it. How can I ever take those words back?" I sighed, the weight of her question settling heavy on my chest. "You can't," I said gently. "Words don't vanish, Emily. They leave marks. But what you can do is make sure your actions speak louder from here on out." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "He made me believe appearances mattered more than love. That respect came from wealth, not sacrifice. I thought, if I left the past behind, I'd finally be enough for him. But the truth is, I only became less. Less of myself, less of your daughter. Her confession pierced me, but it also opened a door I had kept closed for too long. Emily, I said, leaning closer, you were never less in my eyes. Not once. Respect isn't bought with money or clothes. It's earned in the way we treat each other. And love is the only inheritance that lasts. Her eyes glistened, her lip trembling. I see that now, Dad. Too late, maybe, but I see it. I shook my head slowly. It's not too late. It's only too late if you keep walking the same road. But if you change your steps, if you walk with humility, with gratitude, then maybe, just maybe, you'll learn the worth of what you almost lost. The room grew quiet, the last light fading into dusk. Emily sat still, her shoulders rising and falling with the weight of what she carried. I watched her, wondering if she truly understood, if the lesson had taken root deep enough to grow. And yet, even as I saw the sincerity in her eyes, a lingering sorrow stayed with me. Because love can forgive, yes, but trust rebuilds slowly, brick by brick. And I knew the test of her words would come not in this moment, but in the days ahead. As night fell, I whispered almost to myself, "Time will tell, Emily. Time will tell." What neither of us knew then was that time had already prepared its answer, and it would reveal itself sooner than either of us expected. The days after her confession felt quieter, though the silence between us was no longer cold, it was heavy, like the pause in a hymn where every note lingers in the air before the choir begins again. Emily stayed close, almost too close, as though afraid that if she left, the thread tying us together might snap. I let her stay. For all the wounds between us, she was still my daughter, and part of me was afraid to let her out of my sight again. One evening, as the first chill of autumn slipped through the windows, she asked if we could walk. We went down the old dirt road where she had once learned to ride her bicycle, her small hands clutching the handlebars while I ran behind, steadying her. The trees rustled above us, their branches arching like quiet witnesses to our history. "Dad," she said softly, her breath visible in the cool air, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I told people you'd embarrass me. I let him turn me against you. How do I live with that?" I stopped, resting my hand gently on her shoulder. "By remembering, Emily, not to drown in it, but to let it guide you. Shame can either break you or teach you. Let it teach you." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she nodded. For the first time, I believe she meant it. We turned back toward the house, and as we walked, I found myself thinking of Margaret. What would she say if she saw us now, father and daughter, stumbling toward reconciliation after so much pain? I imagined her smile, gentle and proud, and for the first time in many years, I felt a small measure of peace. Back at the house, Emily lingered in the doorway, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the frame. "Thank you for letting me come back," she whispered. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be the daughter you deserve." I touched her cheek, my thumb brushing away a tear. "You don't have to prove love, Emily. You only have to live it." She held my hand for a moment longer, then stepped inside, the light of the kitchen wrapping around her like a fragile promise. That night, as I sat alone after she had gone to bed, I looked at the old envelope still resting on the table. I thought about how close I had come to burning it, how close I had been to giving up on her entirely. But something inside me had held on, even when my heart wanted to quit. And in that moment, I realized the truth I needed to leave behind for anyone who might listen. A father's love isn't measured by invitations or ceremonies, nor by money or land. It's measured in the quiet endurance of sacrifice, in the willingness to forgive even when the world says you shouldn't. I don't know what the future holds for Emily and me. Maybe trust will take years to rebuild. Maybe wounds will ache long after they heal. But one thing is certain: no daughter, no matter how far she strays, can erase the love of a father who never stopped keeping her seat at the table.